Chapter 496, A Big Fish. Xia Qianqian and the female spell cultivator saw Lu Yi off as he flew away. The female spell cultivator kept waving her hand with a yearning look on her face. Xia Qianqian shot her a look and said, "He's already gone, you little wench. You can stop waving your hand now." The female spell cultivator immediately deflated. "How can you say that? It was your idea." "Yes, and you failed." "So useless," Xia Qianqian criticized in a disappointed tone. "It's not my fault. He's just too resistant to feminine charm," the female spell cultivator complained in an aggrieved tone. She had already tried her best to win Lu Yi over to her side, but he still chose to leave in the end. "Whatever. Take good care of them, okay? I'll send a ward cultivator your way when I find one," Xia Qianqian instructed before passing the control gem to the female spell cultivator and rising into the sky. "Bye, senior sister," the female spell cultivator said and waved her hand again. Lu Yi was still wearing his fox mask as he cut a straight line across the sky. Right now, he felt like there was nowhere he couldn't go. Back in the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was practically nowhere he could go without being recognized and pursued like a rat. It felt wonderful not having to look behind his back every step of the way. When nighttime came, he landed in a random cave in the wilderness to catch some rest. It wasn't long before he started a fire inside the cave and began barbecuing a large chunk of meat on top of it. A fragrant scent began spreading throughout the cave. Lu Yi was busy setting up some wards deep within the cave when suddenly he appeared from the ground and reported in a soft voice, "I couldn't locate the observer." Lu Yi nodded. "That's to be expected. It's probably that ghost cultivator." He was referring to the ghost cultivator he had trounced yesterday, Jianghu. Not long after he bade Xia Qianqian goodbye and left the arcane glade, Lu Yi suddenly felt as if he was being watched from somewhere. It was a feeling he was very familiar with when he was at the Spirit Creek battlefield. It wasn't long before he became certain that it wasn't his paranoia talking. Someone really was following him in secret. He had left the cave earlier in hopes of tracking the person following Lu Yi in secret to no avail. Assuming that their tail was the fifth-order ghost cultivator Lu Yi had defeated earlier, then it was no wonder she couldn't find anything. Even Lu Yi could only spot him if he had activated insight, and the ghost cultivator happened to be close by. He should have known that Xia Qianqian's reward wasn't so easily received. At the very least, it looked like he had caught the attention of her enemies. Then again, he had defeated two fifth-order cultivators as a third-order cultivator, not to mention that the Jiang brothers were no ordinary fifth-order cultivators. They were both capable of defeating enemies higher than their cultivation level in their own right. Of course, he had drawn their attention. Unfortunately, there was no way Lu Yi could have hidden his strength. His cultivation level was 2 minor realms below his opponent's, but Jiang Liuzi was a sword cultivator as well. It would be suicidal to hide his strength against an opponent that powerful. Rather than risking his life, he would rather end the fight as soon as possible. At least this way he wouldn't be showing off too many of his cards. Lu Yi could have sped up and shaken off his tail upon noticing him, but that would make it crystal clear that he knew he was being followed. There were better ways to achieve the same outcome. For starters, he could turn around and give the ghost cultivator the scare of his life, but that would be a bad idea at the moment because he was sure that the ghost cultivator wasn't operating alone. That ninth-order young man had seemed extremely interested in him, and he wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that he was the one who set the ghost cultivator on him. Obviously, Lu Yi was no match for him. A while later, Lu Yi left the cave and took to the skies once more. In the darkness, Jiang Qingzi watched Lu Ye's departing figure with a puzzled expression. As Lu Yi had theorized, the person following him was none other than the ghost cultivator, Jiang Qingzi. Not only that, he was right in guessing that the ninth-order young man was the one who instigated Jiang Qingzi to follow him in secret. Jiang Qingzi couldn't figure out why Lu Yi had suddenly decided to take off when it was the perfect time to catch some rest. Regardless, he hurriedly sent his companions a message before chasing after Lu Yi once more. An hour later, Lu Yi landed about 50 kilometers away from his previous location and walked into another cave. In the darkness, Jiang Qingzi also descended on the ground before sending another message. Tens of kilometers away, the Ninth Order young man and Jiang Liuzi could be seen flying toward Lu Ye's latest location. They hadn't dared to get too close because they didn't want to warn Lu Yi of their suspicious activities. If Lu Yi found out that they were tracking him, he would surely summon Xia Qianqian to his aid. The situation would become complicated if that happened. Jiang Liuzi looked much better after a full day's rest. While following behind the young man, he voiced his puzzlement. "Senior Brother Wei, who is that Foxface? Why do you care so much about him?" Foxface was unimaginably powerful, and Jiang Liuzi was sure that he was a famous cultivator. However, that didn't explain Wei Kei's obsession with the man. Wei Kei was soon to ascend to the real lake realm after all. There shouldn't be many things left in the Cloud River battlefield that could catch his attention. Wei Kei asked, "Have you heard of the Crimson Blood Sect?" "Of course I have." Who hadn't heard of the Crimson Blood Sect of Bingzhou? 30 years ago, they were the strongest sect of the Grand Sky Coalition. "Have you heard of Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood Sect then?" Jiang Liuzi exclaimed in surprise, "You're saying that Foxface is that man?" "So, you have heard of him," Wei Kei commented with an approving smile. It wasn't difficult to find out Lu Ye's identity. All he needed to do was to find who stood out in the Spirit Creek battlefield in the last half a year or so, and who among them was a saber-wielding combat cultivator. Wei Kei had sent the message immediately after he left with his people. At first, he didn't suspect anything. He was just curious about Lu Yi and wanted to know the mysterious young man better. Suffice to say, his mind was blown when he found out his true identity. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood Sect was the most wanted man by the Thousand Demon Ridge bar none in the past half a year or so. The combined bounty on his head was enough to make even a Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivator like him turn green with greed. To give an example, he would never have to worry about cultivation resources for the rest of his life if he could kill Lu Yi. As a member of the Thousand Demon Ridge, there was no way Wei Kei could say no to the temptation. That was why he immediately ordered Jiang Qingzi to keep an eye on the Arcane Glade. Once Lu Yi left the Arcane Glade, Jiang Qingzi immediately chased after the young man from afar. Wei Kei wasn't surprised that Jiang Liuzi had heard of Lu Yi. It was because the sword cultivator was still at the Spirit Creek battlefield when the legendary Battle of Golden Tip broke out. However, the Jiang brothers were heaven-grade Ninth Order cultivators, and Lu Yi was just a Fifth Order cultivator at the time. Astounded as they were at the news, they did not think much of Lu Yi at all. At the time, Lu Yi still wasn't strong enough to pose a threat against the Thousand Demon Ridge. 2 months after the Battle of Golden Tip, the Jiang brothers ascended to the Cloud River realm. They had not left the Cloud River battlefield since. Naturally, they had almost no idea about the waves Lu Yi had caused not just in the Spirit Creek battlefield, but in Jiuzhou as well. That said, Jiang Liuzi was aware that the sects of the Thousand Demon Ridge had come together to put an unbelievable bounty on Lu Ye's head. It was because of that bounty that thousands of cultivators had gathered at the Golden Tip and became Lu Ye's first stepping stone to legendary status. "Are you sure it's him? Just how fast does he cultivate?" Jiang Liuzi was stunned because it had only been a year or two since the Battle of Golden Tip. This meant that Lu Yi had become a Cloud River realm cultivator in that short amount of time. Not only that, the young man was a Third Order Cloud River realm cultivator already. He and his brother had entered the Cloud River battlefield at least a year earlier than Lu Yi, but the young man had almost caught up to their cultivation level already. If only his cultivation speed is his only merit. "I bet you and your brother have no idea what he did on the Spirit Creek battlefield, have you?" Wei Kei shook his head. To be honest, he himself was shocked when he received the detailed information on Lu Yi. The 2 years Lu Yi spent on the Spirit Creek battlefield were easily some of the worst years the Thousand Demon Ridge had suffered since the day of their founding. This was especially true during the second year where Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood Sect came to rule over the Spirit Creek battlefield as its one and only overlord. Wherever he went, the sects of the Thousand Demon Ridge quaked in their boots. Even Tier 1 sects were unable to stop him in his tracks. In the end, the Thousand Demon Ridge had no choice but to pay him a hefty ransom to buy their safety. It was even said that the Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators cheered like it was New Year when the monster finally ascended to the Cloud River realm. Suffice to say, no cultivator had ever managed to trigger such a reaction from an entire faction until Lu Yi. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, his legend would probably be remembered for at least the next 1 or 2 decades to come. Jiang Liuzi could not help his curiosity. What on earth did Lu Yi do in the Spirit Creek battlefield? For a moment, Wei Kei did not say anything. A while later, he finally let out a sigh and gave Jiang Liuzi a summary. The summary was brief, but the sword cultivator's face still burned with shame when he heard it. If he could travel back in time and warn his past self to refrain from asking about the details, he would. To say that Lu Yi had wiped the floor with his faction in the Spirit Creek battlefield would be an understatement. The second-hand embarrassment alone was almost enough to make him consider defecting to the Grand Sky Coalition. That is why every top-tier sect had increased the bounty on his head after he ascended to the Cloud River realm. They were hoping that we could locate the bastard and eliminate him before he became too strong to handle. Unfortunately, you know how the Cloud River battlefield is, not to mention that it has only been a while since Lu Yi got here. No one has managed to locate him, until now. Lu Yi had already displayed a monstrous amount of talent when he was still a Spirit Creek realm cultivator, and he would only become even more monstrous as time passed. Naturally, the Thousand Demon Ridge wanted him gone as soon as possible. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, there was literally no one who was a match for him. That was no longer the case. Here in the Cloud River battlefield, the Thousand Demon Ridge had a real chance at ending him once and for all. However, communication between Jianghu and the Cloud River battlefield was much more inconvenient than the Spirit Creek battlefield. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, the legate could just communicate with their keeper of seal through the battlefield imprint. This convenience was not available in the Cloud River battlefield. Not only did someone have to physically enter the Cloud River battlefield to pass on the message, they had to stay there for an entire month before they were allowed to leave. It was the rule the heavens had set, and no one could circumvent it. As a result, Cloud River realm cultivators did not have a convenient way of trading information in and out of the Cloud River battlefield. Take Wei Kei for example. If Lu Yi hadn't displayed an unbelievable amount of talent during the fight, he would not have made the inquiry. He would never hear of the young man until he ascended to the real lake realm and returned to Jianghu. Lu Yi would be shedding tears of fury if he knew about this. Before he wore his disguise, he had been able to strut about without being recognized by any Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator. But after he put on the fox mask, his enemy had dug out practically everything there was to know about him except the color of his underwear. How ironic was that? Chapter 497, He's Gone? Jiang Liuzi asked with a frown. When did he enter the Cloud River battlefield? I'm not sure about the exact date, but according to the intel I received, it hasn't even been 2 months since he ascended to the Cloud River realm. Jiang Liuzi gasped audibly when he heard this. The time one ascended to the Cloud River realm was usually the time they entered the Cloud River battlefield as well. At most, they would take a short break before departing for the Cloud River battlefield. However, Lu Yi was already a third-order cultivator. Was it even possible to cultivate that fast? While it was true that a cultivator was expected to shoot through the cultivation levels at the Cloud River realm thanks to the miraculous cultivation resources that were amulets, it wasn't actually easy to acquire them. Even if someone was lucky enough to stumble upon a Token of Providence event, they would have to compete against hundreds, if not thousands of people to obtain maybe 1 or 2 amulets. It was also practically impossible to obtain an amulet that was above one's station, so to speak. For example, purple and gold amulets were generally obtained by 8th and 9th order cultivators. If Jiang Liuzi, a mere 5th order cultivator, tried to lay his hands on something that valuable, his betters would not hesitate to teach him some humility. With that in mind, just how many amulets did Lu Yi obtain to make it to the 3rd order already? He could scarcely imagine. There were few things more hurtful than comparison. For the longest time, Jiang Liuzi believed his cultivation speed was better than most, and he still did. However, he was practically trash compared to Lu Yi. Suddenly, Wei Kei said, "We're here." When they descended to the ground, Jiang Qingzi emerged from the darkness and welcomed them. "Is he still there?" Wei Kei asked. "Yes. He's been hiding inside that cave this whole time," Jiang Qingzi reported while pointing at the cave Lu Yi had entered earlier. Wonderful! Wei Kei's smile widened as he instructed. Jiang Qingzi, head inside and ambush Lu Yi. If you succeed, then all is well. If you fail, then Jiang Liuzi and I will kill him. When it is over, 60% of the bounty will go to me, and 40% to you both. Wei Kei was asking a lot here, but he was a ninth-order cultivator. He had the right and power to make such a demand, so Jiang Liuzi simply accepted the arrangement. Jiang Qingzi still didn't know who Lu Yi was, so he didn't really understand what Wei Kei was saying. Did that bastard have a bounty on his head? In any case, if his brother had nothing to say about the arrangement, then he was okay with it as well. I'm going in, Jiang Qingzi said before grabbing a pitch-black dagger with his right hand and turning invisible. He then slowly made his way toward the cave. During the earlier battle, Lu Yi had knocked him out of concealment almost immediately and beaten the crap out of him. Naturally, Jiang Qingzi was displeased with the outcome. Even now, he still thought that Lu Yi had just gotten lucky. Of course he, a ghost cultivator, was going to lose against a combat cultivator in close combat. In his mind, he swore to undo the damage that had been done to his pride. This time, he would teach Foxface the true terror of a ghost cultivator. Wei Kei and Jiang Liuzi got into position after Wei Qingzi vanished. They were ready to assist the ghost cultivator in case anything happened. For a while, nothing happened at all. Then, a massive explosion erupted from the cave, and a giant tongue of flame shot out of the cave entrance. This sudden turn of events caught both Wei Kei and Jiang Liuzi by surprise. A ghost cultivator's assassination was supposed to be silent, right? So what was with this explosion? Wait, that's not right. No. Jiang Liuzi let out a cry of alarm before flying straight toward the cave. Wei Kei also followed behind him with a frown. A while later, Jiang Liuzi dug out Jiang Qingzi from under a pile of rubble. The ghost cultivator was covered in blood, soot, and ash, and every strand of his hair was standing on end. He looked absolutely terrible to say the least. The only silver lining was that he wasn't dead. What the hell happened? Where's Lu Yi? Wei Kei asked. The cave had collapsed, but Wei Kei could tell with his senses that Lu Yi was nowhere to be seen. Jiang Qingzi panted heavily with a frightened expression. I didn't see him when I went inside. What I can tell you was that I was nearly killed by a heavens-damned explosive ward. He thought this was the moment he would redeem himself, but he had barely set foot in the cave when the explosive ward triggered and nearly killed him. While most ghost cultivators possessed excellent speed, the cave was exceptionally small and narrow. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to escape the cave in time before the explosive ward triggered and buried him beneath a pile of rubble. As for the heavens-damned Foxface who was surely behind the ward, he hadn't seen the man at all. I thought you said he was inside? Wei Kei asked with an ugly expression. He just vanished somehow. Jiang Qingzi defended himself. He had seen Foxface entering the cave with his own eyes, and he never saw him leaving through the entrance. There was no denying the fact that the bastard had vanished like a ghost though. Looking at all the evidence, Lu Yi must have noticed that someone was following him in secret. That was why he had set up an ambush in the cave before sneaking away using a concealment talisman paper or something. Wei Kei's expression was grim to say the least. He thought this would be easy, but not only had they fallen for their prey's trickery, they didn't even know where he was right now. The Cloud River battlefield was a massive place. If Lu Yi truly set his mind to hide, who could possibly dig him out of his hidey hole? If he could spread the message that Lu Yi was here and mobilize every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator to action, then sure, the young man would be cornered eventually. However, the Cloud River battlefield was a much more complicated place than the Spirit Creek battlefield, not to mention that he wasn't willing to share the bounty with too many people. He was a ninth-order cultivator. If he could locate Lu Yi, he had a 100% chance of killing the young man no matter how exceptional he was. The only reason he even brought the Jiang brothers with him was because of Jiang Qingzi. He didn't have a realistic way to follow Lu Yi without being detected, so he needed the ghost cultivator to do the tracking. Unfortunately, Lu Yi still managed to detect Jiang Qingzi. He even set up a trap for the poor bastard and nearly killed him. It wasn't a fluke after all. Just how strong is his perception to detect a fifth-order ghost cultivator who was 2 minor realms above him? Let's split up. There is no way he could have gone far. Wei Kei ordered before leaping into the air, leaving behind the 2 dumbfounded Jiang brothers. He wasn't worried that the Jiang brothers would hide Lu Yi's location from him if they located him first. They should know from the earlier battle that Lu Yi was not someone they could kill in short order, and that he was the only one in their group who could realistically kill the combat cultivator. On the other hand, he could claim the full share of the bounty if he located Lu Yi first. The only thing that worried him was the Jiang brothers notifying their sects about Lu Yi's appearance. Since their sects were Tier 2 sects, it was inevitable that some Cloud River Realm experts would be mobilized to join in the search. There was nothing he could do to stop this though, so he didn't even bother to try. Who on earth is Foxface anyway? Why does senior brother Wei care about him so much? Jiang Qingzi asked after Wei Kei's departure. He is Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect. I feel like I've heard that name from somewhere. He's the guy who fought in the Battle of Golden Tip, Jiang Liuzi reminded his brother. Oh. I still remember the insane bounty on that guy's head to this day. Now you get why Wei Kei cares so much about him. Jiang Qingzi's wounds suddenly didn't feel that painful anymore. What are we waiting for then? Let's search for that bastard already. After we message senior brother Lu Shu and the others. Wei Kei wants to claim all the bounty for himself. We should give him a run for his money, don't you agree? Although they all belonged to the Thousand Demon Ridge, and they definitely stood united when the greater good was on the line, it was inevitable that they would succumb to their baser nature in all other matters. That was just how humanity was. It wasn't long before more people learned that Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect had been spotted in the Cloud River battlefield. Most 8th and 9th order cultivators had never heard of Lu Yi because they rarely left the Cloud River battlefield, but after Jiang Liuzi shared with them everything he knew about the combat cultivator, they were tempted by the ludicrous bounty on his head if nothing else. It was literally the opportunity of a lifetime. They rushed toward Lu Yi's last known location immediately for fear that someone else would kill the young man before them. Meanwhile, Lu Yi was sitting inside a cave and enjoying his barbecued meat. It was none other than the first cave he entered after leaving the arcane glade. So, how did he cross over from the second cave without being detected or caught by the enemy? By using a teleportation ward, of course. Earlier he had set up a master ward in the first cave before flying to the second cave. After flying 50 kilometers to the second cave, he set up a sub-ward and an explosive ward before teleporting back to the first cave. He hadn't seen Jiang Qingzi entering the second cave and triggering the explosive ward, but he was sure that his enemies would attempt to infiltrate it eventually. When that happened, the explosive ward would trigger and destroy everything within. The ghost cultivator might survive, but his sub-ward definitely would not. They would never know that he had teleported back to the first cave using a teleportation ward. Coincidentally, he had returned just in time to avoid overcooking his meat. He had been enjoying his dinner since. It had been a long time since Lu Yi used a teleportation ward. To his surprise, the experience did not feel nearly as bad as his initial experiments. The connection between the master ward and the sub-ward were much stronger. Obviously, it was because his cultivation level was much higher than before. When he first set up the teleportation wards, he was only a Heaven 7 cultivator. At his current level, he should be able to create teleportation wards with a longer teleportation range. This was great news, of course. The farther a teleportation ward could teleport something or someone, the better it was. Lu Yi did not stay in the cave for long. He left as soon as he collected his ward flags. He was still holding his barbecued meat when he took to the sky. Lu Yi wanted to be as far away from the cave as possible because a 50-kilometer distance was nothing to a Cloud River Realm cultivator. His trackers might have a lot of ground to cover, but given enough time and numbers, it was only a matter of time before they made it back to the first cave. They would discover if he took too long. The night was pitch black tonight. Even with his superior vision, he was unable to spot even a single star in the sky. Lu Yi did not stop flying in the opposite direction of the second cave until dawn broke, crossing at least 1,000 kilometers before descending on a random riverside in the wilderness. Both him and Amber were dusty from the journey, so they took a bath before finding a secluded spot to hide. He then set up a couple of wards before taking a moment to tidy his stuff. After he recovered his mental strength and spiritual power, Lu Yi finally took out a purple amulet and crushed it between his fingers. It was the one he had drawn using the amulet casket Xia Qianqian gave him. There was nothing a Cloud River Realm cultivator loved more than an amulet. He saw no reason to delay using it, especially in light of recent events. Chapter 498, Carnage Coliseum. Several hours later, when the purple vortex pouring out the spirit mist had disappeared, Lu Yi checked his river of spiritual power and noted that it was bigger than before. However, he was nowhere close to ascending to the fourth order. When he left the Myriad Beast domain, he had spent nearly 30,000 battle points to buy enough amulets to boost him all the way to the third order. Not only that, he was well on his way to the fourth order. Unfortunately, the greater one's cultivation was, the more cultivation resources they had to consume to get to the next level. Assuming his rough calculations were correct, he probably needed only 1 gold amulet to ascend from the first to the second order, 2 gold amulets to ascend from the second order to the third order, and 4 gold amulets to ascend from the third order to the fourth order. Naturally, his need would only increase over time. This was why a single purple amulet was nowhere near enough to boost him into the fourth order despite his good progress. Lu Yi was okay with this though. It hadn't even been 2 months since entered the Cloud River battlefield, and he was already a third-order cultivator. He dared not say that his cultivation speed was unprecedented, nor would he claim that no one would ever surpass him in the future. However, he had to be one of the fastest-growing Cloud River realm cultivators in the history of Jianghu. Knowing that, it would be plain hubris to expect more from himself. Lu Yi was just about to take his leave when suddenly he felt a strange buzz from all around him. At the same time, the world itself seemed to darken unnaturally. Lu Yi immediately grabbed the inviolable while observing his surroundings carefully. Before he could identify what was happening though, he saw a bright light rising into the sky like a new star from far, far away. This alone would be cause for alarm, but the fact that the light was blood red in color worried Lu Yi even more. The red light would continue to brighten in intensity as it climbed higher into the sky. Right now, anyone within a few 100,000 kilometers of the light could probably see it. Lu Yi frowned at the ominous-looking red light while going through all the intel he had bought from the Divine Trade Association since arriving at the Cloud River battlefield. He did not know what the red light was, but it could only be an act of the heavens. Cloud River realm cultivators did not have the ability to cause such a huge scene. A few seconds later, he recalled something and suddenly turned as white as a sheet. Without hesitation, he constructed soar and shot into the sky like a shooting star. Not only that, he even boosted his speed further with Windwalk, going from 0 to 200 in an instant. Lu Yi generally avoided using soar with Windwalk because the 2 glyphs cost an ungodly amount of spiritual power to maintain, but this time he didn't try to conserve his energy at all. He escaped like an ancient beast of legend was mere seconds away from devouring him whole. "What's wrong, Lu Yi?" Yi voiced her concerns from inside Amber. She did not understand why Lu Yi was acting like he was being chased by the enemy. She tried spreading out her senses but could not sense anyone close to them. "I'll explain to you later," Lu Yi replied in a hurry. There was no time to even explain things to. If the red light really was what he thought it was, then there was no time to waste. To the strong, the red light represented great opportunities and rewards. But to a puny third-order cultivator like him, it was more like the Grim Reaper himself. He had to get out of range before it was too late. Lu Yi would continue to fly like he was being hunted while the bright red star hung in the sky for an incense stick or so. Then, it suddenly exploded into a smattering of light beams. From a distance, the scattering light beams looked like a ridiculously huge meteor shower. Each beam was ridiculously huge as well. Lu Yi managed to cover between 100 to 150 kilometers of distance during the short period where the red star was idle, but he suddenly cried out in alarm, "Watch out!" His pupils constricted when one of the light beams suddenly cut through his vision and landed right in front of him. The next moment, it transformed into a massive screen of light. Lu Yi knew this was going to be bad, but there was no time to slow down. He just barely managed to cross his arms in front of him and turned on his side before he slammed hip first into the light screen. There was a loud bang as Lu Yi crashed full force into the light screen. The light screen did not budge in the slightest, but the combat cultivator was bounced away like a ball. He hit the ground so hard that he was dizzy and incapacitated for a few seconds. There wasn't a part of his body that didn't hurt like hell. After he managed to climb back to his feet, Lu Yi glared at the red screen in front of him with a complicated expression on his face. In the end, he didn't manage to escape. It definitely wasn't due to a lack of trying though. The light beam had landed in front of him and blocked his path right as he was about to make his escape. He could not believe that it was just a coincidence. A bird's-eye view of this region would reveal that the red screen resembled an upside-down bowl that contained everything within hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and as Lu Yi had just proven with his own body, no one was allowed to leave its boundaries until the event taking place inside the red screen was over. Well shit. I guess our plans to find Zhu Jia will have to be postponed to a later date. He emerged from Amber's body and stared at the massive light screen in front of her with a stunned expression. She could see countless thin light strands circulating within the light screen like blood. Its very existence seemed to scream murder and carnage. What on earth is going on, Lu Yi? The Carnage Colosseum. We're trapped inside the Carnage Colosseum right now. Lu Yi shared the intel he had purchased from the Divine Trade Association with Yi after answering her question because the event was a little too complicated to explain verbally. While the young girl was checking the contents of the jade slip, Lu Yi observed his surroundings and confirmed once again that they were definitely trapped within the Carnage Colosseum. Frankly, this was one of the last events he expected to encounter in the Cloud River battlefield, or at least not as a third-order cultivator. The Carnage Colosseum was a random event that could only be encountered in the Cloud River battlefield. Every time it appeared, an area of land would be enveloped in a screen of red light. The size of the affected region wasn't always the same, and it was very difficult to predict when it would happen. Sometimes it only occurred once every year or two. Sometimes it occurred multiple times in a single year. The location of the Carnage Colosseum was also completely random. The one constant of this event was the blood-red screen. Anyone could pass through the red screen and enter the region after it appeared, but they wouldn't be able to leave until the event was over. Judging from the size of the red screen, this was definitely a large-scale event. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers of land was huge even for a Cloud River realm cultivator. Of course, it was nothing compared to the entire Cloud River battlefield. Obviously, the Carnage Colosseum was given its name because it involved a lot of violence and carnage. Usually, unfamiliar Cloud River realm cultivators rarely got into conflict with one another. It was because they didn't know the other person's affiliation. It was a different story in the Carnage Colosseum, however. A cultivator's affiliation was automatically revealed as soon as they got within a certain range of another cultivator. In this sense, it was a bit similar to how the battlefield imprints lit up on their own when a sect fought against another sect. In the Spirit Creek battlefield, a cultivator's battlefield imprint would automatically light up if a war was declared between two sects and they were close to a member of the opposing faction. It was so that unfamiliar cultivators wouldn't accidentally kill their own allies. So far, Lu Yi had not killed more than a handful of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators since he entered the Cloud River battlefield. It wasn't because his nature had changed, but because he simply did not have the chance to do so. Conflict rarely happened between two unfamiliar cultivators unless they knew for certain that the other person belonged to an opposing faction. It was different in the Carnage Colosseum, however. If two cultivators were close enough to one another, then their affiliation would automatically be revealed. If they belonged to the same faction, then all was well. If not, then of course they were going to murder the crap out of each other. This was doubly true if one cultivator was drastically stronger than the other. This was why Lu Yi had tried to escape as soon as he discovered the truth. Even if he was used to overcoming enemies who were multiple minor realms above his cultivation level, he was just a third-order cultivator. If he ran into an 8th or 9th order enemy, forget killing them, he might not even be able to escape their wrath. Simply put, he was still too weak to participate in a dangerous event like the Carnage Colosseum. Unfortunately, he ultimately did not make it out of the Carnage Colosseum. In fact, he strongly suspected that the heavens were fucking with him. He was literally a few steps away from freedom when the light screen just happened to block his way. He had no doubt that the heavens were behind the Carnage Colosseum. He wouldn't even be surprised if someone told him that the heavens had specifically created it to test the cultivators of Jianghu. At the beginning of his cultivation journey, he had believed that the heavens were an ephemeral existence that rarely interfered with a cultivator's life. However, he came to notice the opposite as his horizons broadened. The Carnage Colosseum was a bloody and dangerous place, but the rewards it offered were just as great. For starters, a Token of Providence event almost always occurred in the Carnage Colosseum. There was a high chance it would manifest a gold amulet as well. It was common knowledge that the Token of Providence event rarely produced gold amulets. For example, the iridescent cloud Lu Yi had encountered during his first day in the Cloud River battlefield was just a tetrachromatic cloud that produced a purple amulet at best. A dichromatic cloud would produce a green amulet at best, a trichromatic cloud would produce a blue amulet at best, and a pentachromatic cloud would produce a gold amulet at best. Not only that, a roster of the Carnage Colosseum was generated for every instance of the Carnage Colosseum. It was similar to the Scroll of Supremacy in the sense that the top 100 performers of the event would be listed on the ranking list. Lu Yi would guess that they were rewarded based on how well they placed on the roster of the Carnage Colosseum as well, but he didn't know for sure because it wasn't mentioned in the intel he bought from the Divine Trade Association. Not only that, the heavens would bestow someone in the Carnage Colosseum a gold amulet every day. Some people might think that this was a wonderful thing, and it was, but only if the chosen cultivator's cultivation level was high enough. Otherwise, it was just an absolute nightmare. Usually, an amulet could be used anytime, anywhere. However, this particular gold amulet could not be used or even stored inside a storage bag until the chosen cultivator had held it for 24 hours. Only then could it be used or stored like a normal gold amulet. To put it simply, the cultivator who was bestowed a gold amulet must somehow protect the amulet for 24 hours straight. Of course, this still wasn't too big of a hurdle to overcome. Theoretically speaking, the holder of the gold amulet simply needed to find a good hiding spot and stay there for 24 hours straight. If they happened to be a ghost cultivator, then even better. Chapter 499. Who on earth were these people? The problem was that the special gold amulet would light up like a beacon once every 6 hours during the 24-hour period. It did not matter how well the holder of the amulet hid. Their location would be revealed immediately. This type of amulet was usually hotly contested by countless elites. After all, it was completely up to luck what kind of amulet one might obtain from a Token of Providence event, but the special amulet bestowed upon the receiver was guaranteed to be a gold amulet. Assuming that one's cultivation level was high enough, it was perfectly possible to snatch it from the receiver's hands and claim it as their own. Lu Yi remained calm as he recalled everything he knew about the Carnage Colosseum. Since he failed to escape the Carnage Colosseum before it was too late, the next best action was to do everything in his power to ensure his survival. A large number of cultivators was guaranteed to arrive at the Carnage Colosseum in the next few days. This was especially true for high-level cultivators like Xia Qianxian or Wei Quebec. While the Carnage Colosseum was more dangerous than rewarding to Lu Yi, it was the opposite for high-level cultivators. There was no way they would allow this opportunity to slip through their grasp. Lu Yi was okay with getting nothing from this Carnage Colosseum. All he wanted was to survive until the end of the event. Although his cultivation level was weak, his ability to survive was way stronger than another cultivator at the same cultivation level. For starters, he could conceal himself using invisibility and conceal presence. Soar and Windwalk guaranteed that he could escape all but the strongest cultivators. This wasn't enough, however. Lu Yi knew that he would need to make a lot more preparations to be truly secure. A plan quickly took form in his mind even as he thanked his past self for having the foresight to create a ton of ward flags in preparation for the future. Otherwise, he would feel so much more insecure right now. There was a Divine Trade Association hotspot within the Carnage Coliseum. The red screen encompassed an entire region of hundreds of thousands of kilometers after all. However, the hotspot would shut down its business and remain closed until the event was over. This meant that he could not enter the hotspot and seek shelter until the event was over, much less trade with them. It was a rule set by the heavens themselves. Lu Yi had prepared a sufficient amount of spirit stones, spirit pills, ward flags and ward keystones beforehand. As long as he was careful, he should be able to survive until the end of the Carnage Coliseum without any issues. Generally speaking, the event should last a month at most. Looking back, most Carnage Coliseums lasted between half a month to a month, though it was impossible to predict how long the event would last before it was actually over. Also, the heavens always gave out a signal right before the event was about to end. Lu Yi was still thinking when the red screen next to him suddenly distorted unnaturally. The next thing he knew, a man stepped right out of it. Clearly, the newcomer was someone who was looking to participate in the Carnage Coliseum. Since the red screen was completely opaque, the newcomer did not see Lu Yi until it was too late, and vice versa. As their eyes met, the battlefield imprint on the back of Lu Ye's hand abruptly shone blue without warning. At the same time, the battlefield imprint on the back of the newcomer's hand shone red. He's a 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivator. Judging from his size and vitality, he was a body-tempering cultivator too. Anyone who dared to enter the Carnage Coliseum alone could not be weak, and anyone who was too weak would not dare to enter the Carnage Coliseum without good reason. It would be suicide otherwise. There was a brief standoff as the body-tempering cultivator glanced back and forth between Lu Yi and Ti. He then said solemnly, "I'm just passing through." Although Lu Yi belonged to the opposing faction, the body-tempering cultivator figured that it would be folly to engage him without figuring out his cultivation level first, not to mention that he was outnumbered 2-1. The body-tempering cultivator nodded and began stepping away after expressing his intention. Lu Yi simply watched him with a blank expression. He remained motionless as well. The body-tempering cultivator was about 50 meters away when he suddenly stopped in his tracks and asked, "You too were trying to leave, weren't you?" The second he said this, Lu Yi immediately launched himself at the body-tempering cultivator like a cannonball. He also fired a golden arc straight at the man. The body-tempering cultivator abruptly spun around and crushed Yi's spell with his bare fist. His mouth split into an ugly, malicious grin. "I knew it." The body-tempering cultivator hadn't dared to attack Lu Yi and Yi at the beginning because he didn't know what their cultivation levels were. That was why he claimed he was just passing through and pretended to leave. If Lu Yi and Yi were powerful cultivators, then there was no way they would let him go without a fight. On the other hand, they could not be too strong if they simply watched him leave without trying anything. Moreover, the duo were standing at the edge of the Carnage Coliseum and facing toward the red screen. It was clear that they were hoping to leave the region. If they were powerful cultivators, they would not do this right at the start of the event. Anyone who was 5th order or even 4th order would not make such a choice. That was why the body-tempering cultivator grew certain that Lu Yi and Yi were newbies. They were at best 3rd order cultivators, and they had to know nothing about the Carnage Coliseum at all. Otherwise, they would know that it was impossible to pass through the red screen. The only way to leave was to wait until the event was over. He took action as soon as he made up his mind. He grew even more certain in his hypotheses when Yi and Lu Yi flared their spiritual power, revealing themselves to be a puny 1st order spell cultivator and a 3rd order combat cultivator. He would be remiss to allow such easy prey to slip through his grasp. The body-tempering cultivator was so confident in his abilities that he didn't even bring out his shield spirit artifact. The fact was that he had crushed Yi's spell in one punch. Suddenly, the body-tempering cultivator's grin froze on his face. Then, he abruptly threw a punch at the combat cultivator and jumped away from him at the same time. Unfortunately, he was a little too slow to dodge the strike that was aimed at his abdomen. When he looked down, he saw that the strike had left a massive gash in his stomach. He could hardly believe his eyes. Did a third-order combat cultivator really just disembowel him? He was a fifth-order body-tempering cultivator. His physique was so strong that even a fifth-order combat cultivator would be hard-pressed to leave such a tremendous wound on his body. And yet, the third-order combat cultivator before his eyes had completely overturned his common sense. The reason he hadn't brought out his shield spirit artifact at the beginning was because he was confident that he would win. Now, that confidence had been stomped into smithereens. Another spell hit him before he could think of a solution. A first-order spell cultivator should not be able to cast this quickly. These two, they're not ordinary Cloud River Realm cultivators. The combat cultivator especially must have entered the Scroll of Supremacy before. The thought flashed across his mind as he hurriedly brought out his shield spirit artifact to block Yi's spells. However, he sensed a burst of killing intent from behind him. The combat cultivator had somehow taken his flank without him noticing. He's ridiculously fast for a third-order cultivator. The body-tempering cultivator hurriedly spun around and just barely blocked Lu Ye's thrust with his shield spirit artifact. His shield arm turned numb from the sheer amount of force that was transmitted through his shield. He's ridiculously strong for a third-order cultivator as well. The body-tempering cultivator was really starting to regret his latest life choice. Just who on earth were these people? They were way stronger than they had any right to be considering their cultivation level. He pushed Lu Ye's saber away with one hand before summoning what looked like a mace to the other hand. Then he brought it down on Lu Ye's head with great force. The spell cultivator was blasting away at his back like a repeating crossbow, but he couldn't afford to pay her any attention right now. He could only channel his spiritual power and vitality to block her spells. Bang bang bang. Although the body-tempering cultivator was extremely durable, it still hurt him to endure a continuous barrage of spells head-on. The good news was that he was 4 minor realms above the spell cultivator. His back might look awful from a bystander's perspective, but the damage was superficial at best, especially since he was a body-tempering cultivator. On the other hand, Lu Yi posed a far greater threat than Yi. As his vitality became mingled with ambers, he channeled a good amount of it into his right arm before swinging his saber upward. When the blow connected, the body-tempering cultivator's eyeballs nearly fell out of his sockets. It was because the blow was so strong that he nearly lost his grip on his shield spirit artifact. As his shield and his arms were flung over his shoulders, his front was completely exposed. Lu Yi had already withdrawn his saber and assumed a stabbing stance. Every hair on the body-tempering cultivator's body stood on end as he tried to respond to the attack. Unfortunately, he just wasn't fast enough to keep up with the combat cultivator. He had just caught himself when the saber flew toward his abdomen. Goosebumps erupted all across his body as he cycled his spiritual power to the limit and attempted to bring his shield spirit artifact in front of the saber. He had already taken enough hits to know just how terrifyingly powerful the combat cultivator wearing a fox mask was. If he failed to block the attack in time, the combat cultivator was going to skewer him like an animal. It looked like he would make it in time when suddenly, the white spirit beast on the combat cultivator's shoulder suddenly let out a thunderous roar. Shockwaves visibly washed over his body and made him feel like someone had cracked open his skull and hit his brain with an invisible hammer. His movement paused for only an instant, but that was all it took to seal his fate. Lu Ye's saber brushed against the edge of the body-tempering cultivator's shield spirit artifact and pierced right through his stomach. Without pause, he activated Burster and caused 1,000,000 energy spikes to burst out of the blade. A painful howl escaping his lips, the body-tempering cultivator pushed Lu Yi away and brought his mace down on his head. Lu Yi immediately withdrew his saber to defend himself, and the blow sent him skidding at least 30 meters away from the body-tempering cultivator and leaving a pair of trenches on the ground. Meanwhile, he was still blasting away at the body-tempering cultivator's back with impunity and knocking him off balance. It would not have been possible if not for the fact that his stomach was bleeding profusely and his insides hurt so much that his face was distorted. He could sense that his death was near. It was because the combat cultivator's saber had somehow transformed into a deadly cactus inside his body and turned his internal organs into goo just now. As his life force ebbed away like crazy, he abruptly spun toward Yi and roared, "You are dead." He knew he wasn't going to walk away from this fight alive. However, that didn't mean he couldn't take at least one of his would-be killers down with him. The third-order combat cultivator was way too agile for him to catch even if he was at full strength. On the other hand, he only needed one hit to turn the first-order spell cultivator into fleshy mush if he could get close to her. Chapter 500, The Roster of Carnage. Yi stood her ground as the burly body-tempering cultivator charged headlong in her direction. Refusing to budge, she fired spell after spell. Each one hit her enemy's shield, eliciting bright, blinding flashes. One was matched with a disdainful smirk from the enemy body-tempering cultivator whose advance was not at all bogged down by her defiant attacks. Although that did not prevent the enemy from thinking, why the hell is this tiny female spell cultivator not running at all? Any other opponent weaker in both power and physical endurance would have long turned around to flee. Even if one were to stand and fight, they would at least prepare to duck. But why is she not doing anything at all? But there was no more time to think. The body-tempering cultivator was just meters away from Yi. Despair and despondency vanished from his eyes as he perished the thought of killing her. The sapling of hope for survival budded. He could catch her alive and use her to barter for his life. He thrust his shield forward like a battering ram. At the same time, he was mindful enough to go soft. Too much force, and he was afraid that he might kill her instead. But instead, he felt nothing. The moment he expected resistance, there was none. The body-tempering cultivator's eyes went as wide as saucers with utter disbelief. Just when he was about to bash his shield into the frail and lithe figure of his opponent, she had sunken right through the ground and discorporated like water seeping into soil. What was that? What the hell just happened? As his mind misfired with chaos, the body-tempering cultivator could barely comprehend what in the world was going on. A living person who was still walking and talking had just vanished into the ground right before him. Yet the ground was still intact. There was no hole, no crater, or even a tunnel. Was it all just a bad dream, or just his own hallucination? He could not make heads or tails of the female cultivator's disappearance, but he could not dwell on that mystery any longer. Something was coming for him from behind, and it was closing in fast. He swiveled around frantically, and the first thing that immediately reflected in his eyes was the scarlet luminescence that bristled the saber now falling down on his head. The body-tempering cultivator furiously lifted his shield. A clumsy clang of steel shook the shield violently enough for him to stagger backward. The wounds he incurred had practically halved his physical strength. But his opponent was already wheeling around for another exchange. The body-tempering cultivator mustered what remained of his strength and leaped to his feet. He needed to get out, prompt. Thinking of dragging another enemy down into the grave with him initially, his plan was foiled the moment his target had vanished. Therefore, the body-tempering cultivator was only bent on escaping. Dying for nothing now was the last thing he had in mind. Lu Yi stared as his opponent ascended into the air. The wooden weapons case hanging on his waist trembled as 9 sparks of light tore out in unison, just as he finished delivering the last of his 3 successive lightning-quick strikes. 3 luminous crescents screamed through the air, swarming around the body-tempering cultivator like an enveloping maneuver. Heavy thuds cascaded as the body-tempering cultivator's lumbering girth recoiled wildly as all 9 flying weapons pummeled at him from behind before the 3 crescent-shaped blasts slammed into him. Plummeting from 50 meters high, he crashed into a smoldering heap on the ground amid his agonizing screams. Discombobulated by the fall, he had only just regained his sight after seconds of disorienting sparkles blinding his vision when he saw a sly and triumphant grin staring down at him. Gripping his weapon, Lu Yi unfeelingly and mercilessly sank the steel of his weapon straight through his opponent. The tip skewered through his chest and came out his back. The body-tempering cultivator spasmed and stiffened. His hand groped for Lu Ye's face as if, in his final moments, he wished to at least see who it was who had killed him. But it was all for nothing. Lu Yi withdrew his weapon and deep claret ichor bubbled out of the wound. The dying cultivator's large hands drooped lifelessly back down as the final glimmers of life in his eyes gradually ebbed away. A speck of red glow flew up from the dead body and into Lu Ye's hand. He bent down to collect the dead man's spirit artifacts and removed his storage bag. After making sure that he did not miss any of the loot, he waved at "Let's go." They had stayed longer than they had supposed to hear. News of the Carnage Colosseum's emergence must have reached the ears of those who were around, and anyone entering the Colosseum would surely pass by these areas, the Colosseum's outer periphery. To top it off, those who possessed the confidence and courage to step into the Carnage Colosseum at this moment were those with utmost assurance of their abilities. Meeting such opponents would only spell trouble if not doom. To say nothing of champions and elites who were already inside the Colosseum in the first place. They would be rushing to the outer periphery at this time so that they could intercept any cultivators from opposing factions and eliminate them to ensure an early advantage. Therefore, for a cultivator of middling abilities like Lu Yi, he needed to get out of this place as soon as possible in the early hours of the Carnage Colosseum's opening. By his reckoning, this place would be the site of a massive bloodbath that he expected to last at least 3 days. Eve vanished back into amber as Lu Yi sped forward with the tiger. The latter did not choose to fly. Running on foot might be slower than flying, but the difference in speed was not far off thanks to Glyph, Windwalk. As they sped ahead, Lu Yi spied something bright streaking across the sky. He halted. He looked up and saw a pennant unfurling in midair, pulsing with a morbid red sheen that rippled across the banner-like mysterious object like blood. The size of the pennant was enough for every cultivator within a radius of tens of thousands of miles, the entirety of the Carnage Colosseum grounds, to see it clearly the moment they looked up. The blood-red banner snapped in the high winds. Lu Yi was wondering what its purpose was before the enigma was cracked soon enough. That's the roster of the Carnage Colosseum. The roster of Carnage. A sense of foreboding dread crept into him. He had just killed a Cloud River Realm 5th Order. That body-tempering cultivator that he had just slain. His rank was higher than that of Lu Ye's. The gigantic pennant that was the roster of Carnage fluttered. Rows of golden inscriptions magically appeared as if an invisible hand was doing the writing. 3 columns, names, Carnage points, rewards, rolled down. The names were all listed according to rank. The first name at the top of the list would be the name of the leading contestant of this round. The present ranking list were as follows. Lu Yi, 120 points, a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification and 9 golden amulets. Xia Liang, 100 points, 9 golden amulets. Tang Ku, 80 points, 7 golden amulets. Yu Fuming, 50 points, 5 golden amulets. Tan Sheng, 45 points, 5 golden amulets. The corner of Lu Ye's eyelids throbbed as he read his own name chased in gold. That's his name. In first place. The most conspicuous spot on the blood list. He would have been less anxious if he were a strong and formidable cultivator without equal. His name could be at the first place of the roster of Carnage for all he cared, and he wouldn't even blink an eye. But right here, right now, the fact remained that he was just a Cloud River Realm 3rd Order. Having his name at the top of the list was no different from forcing him to walk the plank. Every single cultivator now inside the Carnage Colosseum would see and remember his name. If there was any reason for relief, that would be the fact that the roster did not include the names of the various sects and orders the contestants belonged to, besides not mentioning their ranks of cultivation. One mention of the Crimson Blood sect and the entire Colosseum would be engulfed by turbulence. The rest of his fellow contestants might be oblivious to his name at the moment, but they would definitely recognize the Crimson Blood sect. Moreover, Lu Yi was confident that he only needed to lay low and bide his time. It would not be long before someone else had accrued more Carnage points than him and taken his place at the top of the roster. The barely a dozen or so names on the roster signified 2 things. The Carnage Colosseum had just emerged and the real bloodbath had not yet begun. Those whose names were listed on the roster were the lucky ones who had found their prey and succeeded in bagging the kill. If the fifth-order body-tempering cultivator had not appeared nearby and foolishly made his hostility known so openly, then Lu Yi and he would not have been able to secure one kill so early. A full roster of Carnage should have 100 names. At the moment, the rest of the roster had yet to be filled up. The 120 points that showed after Lu Ye's name must be the points awarded to him for his kill. A Cloud River Realm 5th Order kill was 40 points. But Lu Yi, by being a lower rank, had defeated an enemy of superior rank, hence the bonus had brought the full figure up to 120. That would mean that everyone's points would be publicly displayed on the banner for all to see. As for the Primus level Wisp of Sanctification and the 9 Golden Amulet, those had to be the rewards promised to the top cultivator, which would only be conferred when the Colosseum closed. Lu Yi did not have the rewards yet. He would though, if he managed to secure first place by the time the Carnage Colosseum ended. But that was a hope as distant as reaching for the stars above. Then again, the rewards had always been different every time the Carnage Colosseum opened. A Carnage Colosseum that encompassed a wider area would have better prizes. With this being a large-scale Colosseum, the rewards were rich enough. 9 golden amulets would have made it so easy for Lu Yi to rise through 5 orders without any difficulty. In addition, the prize of a Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification, too, was enticing enough. A wisp of that class could make any spot of ground extraordinarily rich with ambient spiritual chi. A Tertius-level wisp would have far lesser potency. But if he could get a hold of a Primus-level wisp, then it would be a great boon to both him and he. Lu Yi looked at the second place. The rewards were rich enough, just as well as the first place, but without the Wisp of Sanctification. The second runner-up would receive 2 less golden amulets. Those in the 4th to the 6th places would win 5 golden amulets apiece, while the rest within the best 10 contestants of the list would be awarded 3. Everyone else up until the 20th place would still win a golden amulet or 2. Contestants after the 20th place would be awarded a purple amulet or 2. Blue amulets would be rewarded to those between the 50th and the 100th. That was it. The end of the roster of Carnage. Whether those beyond the 100th mark would win any prizes or not, Lu Yi couldn't tell. There could be something, or maybe nothing. Nevertheless, it went without saying that the first 10 places, most especially the first 3, offered the best rewards. Just the amount of golden amulets could make anyone, Lu Yi included, salivate. So much so that the Cloud River Realm elites in this bloody tournament would bend over backwards to get as high a placing as possible. Understandably so, since just 1 or 2 golden amulets could barely do them any good. Winning as many golden amulets as possible was very likely their only chance to further their long-hampered progress. Across the tens of thousands of miles wide expanse, cultivators were hurrying this way. Soon enough, the beginning of the huge slaughter known as the Carnage Colosseum would be underway. Lu Yi was not expecting himself to achieve any favorable results. What mattered above all else was survival. He could not get out, hence he had to do whatever necessary to survive. To survive is to win. Right now, he was concerned with his name being at the top of the roster of Carnage. He could almost feel a target painted on his back and eyes watching him from the shadows. If that were true, then danger was coming and he needed to do something if he didn't want to end up dead. Chapter 501, That's Your Junior, Isn't It? Lu Yi wasted no more time gawking at the billowing pennant in midair. He needed to get out of the peripheral areas of the Colosseum grounds as soon as possible. But he did not want to venture too deep into the central areas either, so the buffer zone between them would be his best bet for staying safe. At the same time, somewhere 30,000 miles away from Lu Ye's position, was another contestant of the Carnage Colosseum who was staring at the newly appeared roster of Carnage. Wei Kei was just miffed at the fact that he could not locate Lu Yi when he saw the first name at the top of the roster. He burst into a triumphant peal of laughter. He had been combing the area for signs of Lu Yi and was disappointed at the lack of promising results. In fact, he had been blaming himself for losing that one last chance of finding Lu Yi. If Lu Yi intended to stay away from him, then Wei Kei might never see him ever again, given the vast size of the Cloud River battlefield. Never did he expect that when fate had just shut the door in his face, It had left a window open for him. A Cloud River Realm Ninth Order like him would face no problem operating in the Carnage Coliseum. Few other Cloud River Realm cultivators could ever dare to defy him and still survive. He might not be the strongest of all Cloud River Realm cultivators, but Wei Kei was confident that getting within the first 10 places of the roster of Carnage was a piece of cake. Even with the relatively wider scale of this Carnage Coliseum, he was certain of winning at least 3 golden amulets. That was why he was pleased to see that his guess was right. Getting placed in the first 10 positions of the roster would ensure that he would walk away from this tournament with at least 3 golden amulets. But what left him absolutely overjoyed was seeing Lu Ye's name emblazoned in gold at the top of the roster. All good things come to those who wait. My patience is rewarded. What a stroke of fate that he's here in the Colosseum too. No one gets out of the Carnage Coliseum before the hour of its disappearance. That means he's trapped in here with me. I can still hunt him down. Wei Kei immersed himself in the fantasy of winning both the prize of being within the first 10 spots of this tournament and the bounty of claiming Lu Ye's head, musing about the riches and the glory that he would be showered with. But he was hardly the only one who had set their sights on Lu Ye's name. Several thousands of miles away, Jianghu and his brother were gazing at the roster of Carnage overhead. The Carnage Coliseum has only just begun and Lu Yi has already got himself 120 Carnage points. That must be a 5th order that he killed. Jianghu only needed to do a quick calculation to accurately divine what Lu Yi had done. Slaying a 5th order was something that he could do too, but Jianghu could barely confess to being able to replicate such speed. It had not even been minutes since the start of this Carnage Coliseum. The notion of how deadly Lu Yi could be invoked an involuntary shudder. But Jianghu could still remember the last time he went toe-to-toe with Lu Yi. He had lost back then and would have been dead too if not for the intervention of Wei Quebec. He's in the Coliseum. Call brother Lu Shu and the others. We cannot let Wei Kei get to him first. Jianghu barked to his brother Jiang Qingzi. The latter nodded vigorously. The pair of brothers might have an agreement with Wei Kei and he was the one who had supplied them with information about Lu Yi, but if Wei Kei wished to claim the credit for slaying the famous Lu Yi himself, then the brothers saw no reason to be coy and pretend that any partnership between them still existed. At any rate, they would rather trust the fellow members of their own order. In the meantime, the acrid tang of blood pervaded the atmosphere that clung to the terrain of a narrow gorge. The bloody sight of bodies sprawled everywhere indicated the aftermath of a freshly decided battle. Xia Liang, clad in a set of tight garb for the convenience of his movement, was looking up, observing the roster of carnage that had just materialized in the sky overhead seconds ago. When he saw where his name was, he frowned. What? I'm only placed 2nd. He had just finished killing a few brazen buffoons who had the self-destructive foolishness to challenge him. He expected to see his name at the top of the roster after making short work of his challenges. Xia Liang peered at the names that trailed below his. Most he recognized, even if he had not met some of them before. At the very least, Xia Liang knew from reputation that the lion's share of the names on the roster was made up of Cloud River Realm 8th or 9th orders. Some he had even dueled against before since most of them had entered the Cloud River battlefield at roughly the same time. Xia Liang gazed at the name above his once more. Lu Yi, just who the hell is this fellow? If this stranger could score 120 carnage points so quickly, then why, the blazes, have I not heard this name before? I've heard that name somewhere. Xia Liang paused. Then he knew where. A junior of his who had just ascended to the Cloud River realm entered the Cloud River battlefield bearing instructions from their order. According to the missive, it mentioned the name of a certain member of the Crimson Blood sect, Lu Yi, and Xia Liang was given specific orders to eliminate this Lu Yi as reprisal for the humiliation that he had caused to their order. Back when he was still in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi had extorted supplies and treasure that were worth 300,000 contribution points, plus 20 journals of saber combat. Never before had the Raving Bladesmen endured such humiliation. That's the name. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect. There might be people who shared the same name, but Lu Yi wasn't a very common name. Hence Xia Liang was sure that this was the enemy he was instructed to hunt down. Even if he was mistaken, he couldn't care less. He had no qualms in butchering the one who snatched the first spot from right under his nose. Especially with the prospect of meeting Li Baxin again. If this really was the real Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect, Li Baxin would be sure to come to his junior brother's aid. That would be very interesting. Xia Liang's face contorted with icy malice at the notion of Li Baxin. It was Li Baxin who had slain his senior Yan Xing. Since the day he was notified of Yan Xing's demise, Xia Liang had vowed that he would not rest until he avenged his senior by killing Li Baxin himself. Yan Xing was the one who had taught him everything he knew. They were not only as inseparable as brothers, they were like father and son. Back in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Xia Liang needed to fear Li Baxin. But here in the Cloud River battlefield, he had long outstripped Li Baxin. But owing to the size of this dimension, he had not been able to locate the latter. This would be a chance. After a few seconds of quick thinking, Xia Liang sent some communications. It did not take long for news that Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood sect was caught up inside the Carnage Coliseum to become public knowledge. Almost an hour later at the banks of Streamview, one of the largest rivers in the Cloud River battlefield that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. A stranger stood by the river. Looking up into the sky, he hissed coldly, "I know you're hiding somewhere nearby, Li Baxin. What is this? Cowardice? And I thought all sword cultivators were reckless fools who would never shy from a fight." He had been pursuing Li Baxin when the latter suddenly vanished. He was sure that Li Baxin must be somewhere in the river, but exactly where, he did not know. Even with one more person, Li Baxin was still very much faster than he was, which was one of the many strengths of sword cultivators. Nevertheless, the stranger did not dare to venture into the river to hunt Li Baxin down. The latter could be hidden anywhere, waiting to ambush him where the hunted could become the hunter. Instead, just when he was at a loss of what to do, the stranger sensed an incoming message on his battlefield imprint. He read the new missive. Suddenly he erupted into peals of laughter. "Lu Yi, recognize that name? That's your junior, isn't it, Li Baxin?" Deep underwater, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were clinging to each other, gripping firmly to the handle of an umbrella-like spirit artifact for dear life. Fatigue and stress hazed their gazes. Understandably so, they had been on the run since the first minute they stepped into the Cloud River battlefield, pursued by enemies and nemesis alike. Fortunately, Feng Yuechan had enough magical instruments to rely on, or they would have both been killed a long time ago. Li Baxin's face turned to stone when he heard Lu Ye's name. Feng Yuechan seized his arm, gingerly shaking her head at him. She was afraid that he would recklessly charge out into the open and get himself killed. Even with both their strengths together, the stranger was just too powerful for them. Otherwise, they would not have had to hide here like a couple of mice. Feng Yuechan was not going to let their efforts go for naught. "How's this, Li Baxin?" the stranger's voice boomed again. "Your junior is now caught in the Carnage Coliseum too. Word has it that many people are now hunting him. So will I. I'll deal with him before coming back around to look for you." The stranger took into the air and left. There was no longer any point in staying. He could do nothing but sit on his own hands if Li Baxin refused to show. Besides, with the emergence of the Carnage Coliseum, this would be a chance for him to win some prizes. With his power, it was a virtual certainty. Beneath the depths of Streamview, Li Baxin was aghast. "Lu Yi, are you really caught inside Carnage Coliseum?" Being an experienced cultivator who entered the Cloud River battlefield just a few months before Lu Yi did, Li Baxin knew perfectly what the Coliseum was all about. A massive battle royale-like meat grinder where there was no exit until the Coliseum ended. To make things worse, every 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivator inside would now be out for Lu Ye's blood. Poor thing. He's only been inside the battlefield for barely 2 months. For all we know, he might not even be a second order yet. How is he going to survive this? He immediately sent a message to Lu Yi. Lu Yi responded quickly, confirming that he really was inside the Carnage Coliseum. "Baxin." Feng Yuechan cried softly. "No. I must go. He's inside there and I cannot leave him there all by himself." Li Baxin uttered with a renewed conviction. He would not have cared if he didn't know. But now that the matter has been brought to his attention, Li Baxian's conscience could not let his own junior brother face all the dangers alone. "I was only trying to say that I'm coming with you," said Feng Yuechan. Li Baxian gazed at her long and hard. Knowing fully well that she would not be taking "no" for an answer, he nodded at once. Very well then. He would have preferred her to keep herself safe. But he knew her. They grew up together and they knew each other best. If he left her here, she would still come after him into the Colosseum anyway, and that would be more dangerous. Despite her delicate and frail appearance, Li Baxian knew that she was a strong woman. The Devoted Ones, as a Tier 2 sect, has elite members operating in the Cloud River battlefield, in addition to 2 arcane glades of their own for the use of their members. Li Baxian had tried urging Feng Yuechan to go to one of the 2 arcane glades for her own safety. But she got angry instead, and Li Baxian had to spend several days coaxing her before she finally forgave him. In the end, it was by having her with him that he managed to survive up until now. Which spoke volumes about how Li Baxian was the pariah amongst the Devoted Ones. Having a mother who commands just as much authority within the order as the Deputy Grand Master, in addition to having the respect and adoration of everyone in the order, ensured that she was supplied with the prerequisite tools and means to survive in the battlefield. A stark contrast to Li Baxian, who entered the battlefield with barely 2 coins to rub together. The umbrella-like spirit artifact not only had incredible defensive capabilities, but it could also mask the spiritual power signatures of those under it, making it a potent instrument of salvation. Chapter 502. Is this how fickle luck can be? As the Scarlet Empyrean overhead maintained its persistent vigil over the Carnage Colosseum domain, deep inside a subterranean cavern more than 30 meters below ground level, Lu Yi was busy planting ward flags everywhere in preparation for casting a magical ward. He did not know how many thousand Demon Ridge cultivators had seen his name at the top of the roster of Kamage. Needless to say, the number must be too great. The huge ruckus that he had befallen upon the 1,000 Demon Ridge outposts of the central region of the Spirit Creek battlefield was the cause of this, and each and every one of them now wanted to quench their thirst for vengeance with his blood. 1,000 Demon Ridge sects and orders might not stand any chance in resisting Lu Yi in the Spirit Creek battlefield, but that would not be the case here in the Cloud River battlefield. Enemies stronger and deadlier than him were 2 a penny, and none of them ever wanted the chance to bury him for good slip by again. Therefore, Lu Yi knew that 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators in the Cloud River battlefield must have been informed of his coming by their respective sects and orders the moment he entered this new dimension. But he could still lay low back then. So long as he maintained a low profile, few people would notice him. But once his identity was discovered, he would be in a perilous predicament. Like now. And to make things worse, being trapped in the Carnage Colosseum resembled in every way a vole being tossed into a cage full of cats. Hence, Lu Yi needed to make some insurance. He had a plethora of glyphs to rely on to keep himself safe, allowing him to hide and even mask his spiritual power signature. But accidents and unexpected mishaps might appear in his most pressing time of need to trip him. Someone might recognize or discover his identity, and when that happened, he would need a failsafe to fall back on if he could not secure a victory. This would be where a teleportation ward fit right in. The teleportation wards that he had used before were usually fixed-point teleportation wards that would be useful enough for escaping from normal threats. But here in the Carnage Colosseum, Lu Yi needed a safer and more secure way. Multi-point teleportation wards. Multi-point teleportation wards would be where all teleportation wards could be used to travel to any other sibling in the system. To that end, he expected that he would need only 7 to 8 of such teleportation wards scattered all around the Colosseum grounds. That would give him the mobility to escape everywhere anytime without fear of being trapped or cornered. Without the superiority he once commanded in the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi knew that he needed to renounce his old penchant for getting into trouble. Unlike fixed-point teleportation wards, this rendition of conveyance wards was understandably more complex. But fortunately for Lu Yi, the increase in his capabilities had also made the difficulty of conjuring these wards easier. Lu Yi completed his first multi-point teleportation ward in an hour. But that was not all. He constructed more wards around it, some to conceal the teleportation ward's presence and a few to detonate the place to prevent anyone from finding out what he had done here. That was another form of insurance, one to prevent others from discovering his insurance. Only after making sure that everything was finally complete, Lu Yi left the place. He would need to be on the lookout for another hidden spot like this for his next teleportation ward. Just like before, he sped forward, refusing to fly so as to not attract any unwanted attention. At the same time, he remained vigilant, his senses alert for any unusual signs. At the first sign of trouble, he would cast glyph, concealment on himself, and stay down. The careful measures seemed to have paid off. All the way, Lu Yi encountered nothing. Along the way, Lu Yi never stopped picking up signatures of spiritual powers clashing. That must be ongoing skirmishes happening around him. Every once in a while, a powerful champion would zip by over his head. Only an 8th or a 9th order would dare to fly without fear of getting attacked. Naturally, Lu Yi knew better than to reveal himself to them. He ran for more than 100 miles before he paused to make sure that he was completely alone. Next, he conjured a glyph, space, using it to sense the link between him and the teleportation ward he built earlier. Without any actual way to find out how far he could stretch the connection, he needed to stop and test to make sure. He could feel that the link was still very strong. That would mean that he could go further. Lu Yi pressed on for almost another 100 miles. That was when he felt the link getting weak. The limit must be nearing. That allowed him to come to a hypothesis. His present rank of cultivation would allow the link of his teleportation wards to stretch as far as 200 miles. That was a vast improvement compared to before, which was a real boon to his plan. The farther his teleportation wards could be from each other, the safer it would be for him as well. He called Yi and sent her to look for a suitable spot underground while he reconnoitered his surroundings too. Sure enough, they found another cave. Lu Yi would have preferred a better spot, but this was the next best thing he could find in the vicinity. He could only hope that any cultivator who passed by would not develop the curiosity to step inside for a look. Lu Yi went inside and traveled almost 50 meters underground before he went to work while Yi watched the entrance of the cave to make sure that there wasn't anyone else. If someone were to trap him inside before the teleportation ward was complete, then Lu Yi would be doomed. Another hour of toiling saw the successful construction of another teleportation ward, along with the other wards for concealment and self-destruction. He had been careful enough in the position of his wards that any cultivator who ventured inside might not trigger the explosive wards so long as he or she did not travel too deep inside. Lu Yi emerged from the cave. He looked up. The roster of carnage was still hanging conspicuously in midair, its entire length and breadth surging in the winds up above. He scanned the list of names. His name had dropped far out of the 50th place, which was within his expectation. More than 4 hours had passed since the Carnage Coliseum first started and numerous skirmishes had broken out everywhere. That would mean people were killed and that would translate into Carnage points. It did not take long for others to rake in more than 100 Carnage points, and that was how Lu Ye's name kept sliding down the roster. At this rate, it won't be too long before his name would be fully off the roster for good. Lu Yi could not care less about his position on the roster. He wanted to survive, and that was all that mattered. He continued his journey. All thanks to glyph, concealment, he could travel on without worrying too much about his safety. Even if he were to stumble into another stranger, he could still easily slip past him as long as they were not in close contact. In almost half a day, Lu Yi had completed up to 4 transportational wards that were linked to each other. Knowing this restored some sense of assurance. Still, he needed more. Lu Yi was stealthily speeding ahead when something caught his attention. He looked up and gazed into the distance. In the horizon, a breathtaking display of color emerged in the form of an iridescent glow at the edge of the skies. Gradually, the luminous hues spread and transformed into a magnificent plume of clouds, painting the sky with ethereal and awe-inspiring beauty. That's the token of providence. The spectacle known as the token of providence was a daily phenomenon that only a scarce handful of cultivators have ever witnessed, given the sheer length and breadth of the battlefield. No one could possibly guess when and where the next token of providence would take place. Lu Yi himself had only seen it once since entering the battlefield. But the conditions seemed to vary within the radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers of the Carnage Colosseum expanse. Every day, the same aerial spectacle of iridescence would appear in different spots around the Colosseum, and every pair of eyes in the vicinity would notice it without fail, giving them a 2 or 3/10 of a chance to enjoy some of heaven's bestowments. In addition, almost every token of providence spectacle yielded iridescent plumes that would confer one or even several golden amulets in one go, making it an attractive phenomenon that all champions and elites in the Colosseum hankered for. Lu Yi peered at the roiling cluster of kaleidoscopic glimmers rolling towards him, a strange dread creeping over his shoulders. He could still remember the last time he witnessed a token of providence incident. Speak of the devil and he shall appear, huh? And he was right. The cloud of prismatic sparkles barely formed, and it began barreling straight at Lu Yi like a giant glacier thundering toward him from above. Despite being still very far away, Lu Yi was certain. It really was coming this way. There was nothing else to think about. Lu Yi turned around and bolted. If only he were outside instead of being stuck here inside this Carnage Colosseum, he would have a slight interest to participate in the race for an amulet or two. He would be more than happy to leave the blue, purple, or even gold ones to other stronger cultivators and just settle with a white or even a green one. Alas, the fact remained that he was still inside the Carnage Colosseum. Stuck with his proverbial neck out, every champion coming his way, especially those whose battlefield imprint glowed red, would immediately see him. No Cloud River Realm Third Order like him could ever hope to survive such odds, even if he had 9 lives. As he sprinted away, Lu Yi stole a glance over his shoulder. That token of providence cloud was still coming his way. A throb pulsed at the corner of his eyes. Is this how fickle luck can be? Instead of giving me anything good, it's giving me trouble. All of a sudden, Lu Yi screeched to a halt and hid. Before him, he could sense a presence approaching, one powerful and enormous. It had to be someone coming after the iridescent clouds. From the spiritual power signature, they seemed to be in 8th order, and Lu Yi was not surprised. Only a champion of such strength would dare to come with such fanfare. But the champion stopped. At barely 300 meters away from Lu Yi, he just stood there, quietly looking at the approaching spectacle. That left Lu Yi in a difficult quandary. Unable to move, he remained where he was with glyph, concealment activated. The biggest problem was that Lu Yi did not know which faction the newcomer belonged to. All would have been well if he were a fellow member of the Grand Sky Coalition, but if he were to expose himself to someone from the Thousand Demon Ridge, then he would be dead meat. The appearance of the Token of Providence event at this inopportune moment had no doubt attracted the eyes of many in the Carnage Colosseum. Some were still charging this way and others were intercepting them. All of a sudden, any peace around these parts erupted into pandemonium. Lu Yi could only pray and hope that the iridescent clouds came no closer to him. But with every second, the cloud just refused to veer off. It kept coming his way, shepherding a mob of cultivators in its wake, some in the air while the rest traveled on foot, while more fights broke out every now and then. Out of nowhere, Lu Yi felt his senses tingle. Something alive had just stepped through the edges of his spiritual perception. Lu Yi quietly activated glyph, insight on both his eyes. A blinding deluge of lights surged into his vision as the glyph powered up. There, hidden not far away, a ghost cultivator. But Lu Yi noted the absence of any sensation coming from his battlefield imprint. He could be an ally. Although Lu Yi wasn't sure if battlefield imprints would provide any warning if one or both parties were invisible. Because if battlefield imprints could be depended on to react when an invisible enemy was nearby, then ghost cultivators would have lost their single most important advantage. Ghost cultivators relied on the elements of stealth and surprise to launch attacks. If battlefield imprints could give any warning even when they were hidden from sight, then anyone in the vicinity would know that a ghost cultivator had to be on the prowl somewhere nearby. Yet the unseen ghost cultivator seemed to have realized that he or she was being watched, swiveling around to look in Lu Ye's direction. Unlike Lu Yi, the ghost cultivator did not have glyph insight, and hence he or she could see nothing at all. Chapter 503, The Unlucky Bloke. That the unknown ghost cultivator could sense Lu Yi looking at them was sign enough that they were at least competent. But without any means to ascertain where Lu Yi really was, they did not want to risk revealing themselves further. Moments later, the ghost cultivator was gone. Whether because of feeling insecure at being watched or something else, they had surreptitiously left the hiding spot. Meanwhile, the iridescent cloud had stopped its advance at more than a dozen miles away from Lu Ye's position. He cast a gaze in the direction of the bright glimmering plumes, feeling a shiver creeping down his spine. That was where he was when the sighting of the Token of Providence event first started. If he had foolishly chosen to stay, then he would be just under the iridescent cloud now. Whatever the matter was, he was glad that he had made the right choice, or he would be in real danger. No, wait. Lu Yi remembered the last Token of Providence incident he witnessed. The iridescent cloud had released spates of amulets in all directions away from it. No one would be at the bottom of the cloud because nothing would fall directly beneath the cloud. That means I'm at the worst spot possible, a dozen or so miles away from the iridescent clouds. That's where the amulets would fall? Oh heavens! Lu Yi was at a total loss for words at his own stupidity. But it was too late for remedies. He could not afford to move an inch or he would expose himself. Everywhere around him, he could feel the presence of several spiritual power signatures, each carefully and deliberately distanced. Lu Yi did not even have to guess who they were, cultivators who came for the amulets. The nearest one was perched atop a tree almost 60 meters away, looking up into the sky. The only solution Lu Yi could come up with was to stay put. Only when the iridescent cloud started to disperse amulets could he make use of the chaos to mount an escape. He waited there, immobile and silent. So did the others around him, the horde of Cloud River Realm 8th or 9th orders nearby. There was no bickering or banter, everyone was poised to pounce. Minutes passed in silence until Lu Yi heard a rustling susurration coming from the direction of the many-hued plume. It roiled and churned. What followed next was exactly what everybody here was waiting to see. Ribbons of colorful lights shot out of the cloud like a mesmerizing display of a fountain of light as amulets were spewed in different directions. Whether amulets were gold, purple, blue, green, or even white, no one knew which was which. The amulets were not shining with their own respective colors when they first appeared. Only after flying for several miles would the amulets finally emit the glow of their own colors. Naturally, the strong would aim for higher-class amulets while the weak could only stick to trying their luck with anything else easier and nearer. But this particular Token of Providence event seemed to have attracted a huge following of cultivators. The contest for the amulets would most likely be a rampageous bedlam. The cultivators all watched with anticipation the many streamers of brilliant radiance zipping over their heads, each of them gradually fading to reveal the respective amulet's true nature. Requiring no further impetus, the multitude of cultivators all rose as one, soaring into the skies to reach for the amulets they were eyeing. Some went up alone, others formed groups. It really was a veritable carnival, given how messy and discombobulated the humongous crowd in the sky was. Even so, more than half of the amulets here had already been settled in the first few seconds before the free-for-all for the rest even began. That was the cue Lu Yi needed. As everyone sprang into action, so did he. Maintaining glyph concealment needed slow movement equal to that of an ordinary person's walking pace. He could not risk breaking his cover, therefore this was the fastest he could manage. Lu Yi could sense the tumultuous undulations of spiritual power around him amidst a backdrop of frenzied skirmishes, where the amalgamation of snarls, grunts, and occasional wails of anguish resounded. He did not need to turn around at all. Needless to say, the ongoing carnival of carnage around him was expectedly and understandably brutal and gritting. If this were outside in the usual Cloud River battlefield dimension, no one would have wanted to put their lives on the line just for a couple of amulets. But here in the Carnage Coliseum, as soon as one realized that a fellow competitor of an amulet was from an opposing faction, it would be a no-holds-barred deathmatch. Lu Ye's stealthy escape was steadily inching towards completion when a sudden blood-curdling cry reverberated in the distance, rapidly drawing nearer and nearer until it swiftly shattered the otherwise growing silence, boring swiftly into his ears. He jerked around just in time to see a blood-drenched cultivator falling from the sky, clearly one of the defeated in the contest for amulets. Someone must have struck him down, and the amount of blood he had lost showed that he was heavily wounded, especially since he was falling down from the sky without being able to regain any shred of balance at all. There was one problem: he was falling straight into Lu Yi. The precipitous fall made Lu Yi wonder if he could take the hit from that incoming human projectile. Without any hesitation, he sidestepped immediately. The swift movement caused glyph concealment to fail, and Lu Yi was exposed. With a deafening bang, the man smashed into the ground, kicking up a dust storm of soot and smoke while he rolled again and again before finally stopping. Twice he tried to get up, but to no avail. He was just too weak. He puked blood and scrambled to his knees, gasping for breath and his face as pallid as chalk. Then his misty vision caught sight of a glow. The glow of a battlefield imprint on the back of another cultivator's hand. Someone's nearby, he realized. Then he noticed it. A Grand Sky Coalition cultivator. He looked up at once, his eyes meeting those of a bewildered and exasperated Lu Yi. Lu Yi was just trying to get out of this mess only to get hurtled right back into trouble again. The soft pale blue glow on the back of his hand was accentuated by the smog-filled ambience like a beacon in a fog. But there was no time for regret. Lu Yi swiftly recollected and propelled himself forward with the explosiveness of a predator lunging at prey, drawing inviolable as he charged. He did not know how powerful his foe still was. There was no time to think. But he looked badly injured, and since he was the only one to realize Lu Ye's presence, Lu Yi could not risk letting him stay alive. The stranger tried to clamber to his feet as he saw Lu Yi charge. But he was hurt during his skirmishes earlier, and the fall had made the injuries worse. He could barely summon and focus his spiritual power, and he could barely count the number of bone fractures all over him, making it almost impossible to get up. But Lu Yi wasn't going to wait until he got up and prepared to defend himself. He shot past the incapacitated man, his blade tracing a straight, fiery arc across his throat. With a petrifying shiver, the man stiffened, his lips quivering as if to speak, although not a syllable came out. A tiny red glow flew over and landed on the back of Lu Ye's hand. But he was quickly joined by another figure who landed abruptly beside him, the powerful signature of his spiritual power indicating that he was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order. Shock and panic gripped Lu Yi as he forcefully swiveled himself to look at the back of the newcomer's hand. That was when he finally calmed down. Neither of their battlefield imprints lit up. They were both Grand Sky Coalition cultivators. The man peered at the dead body on the ground before he returned a glare at Lu Yi. Exasperated, he snorted, "Bloody thanks for stealing my kill, kid." That would mean that he was the one who had struck down the poor stranger and he had come down to finish off his opponent for good. But the kill, plus the carnage points, had fallen right into Lu Ye's lap and he got to it first. Lu Yi returned a blank look at him. He did not ask for it. It was the poor unlucky bloke who fell right in front of him, and Lu Yi had no other choice but to complete the deed before he started to alert the whole Colosseum about his presence. Nevertheless, the allied champion did not choose to begrudge Lu Yi any further. He quickly noticed that Lu Yi was just a 3rd order and frowned, "Get out of this place now before you get yourself killed." Lu Yi politely clasped his fist in formal greeting and turned around. He hurried away as quickly as he could this time, not even activating glyph concealment. The champion waited until Lu Yi was gone before he bent down and collected the dead man's storage bag. Next, he pried open the man's fingers and from inside retrieved a blue amulet. He did not bully Lu Yi out of his just desserts. It was rightfully his all along. The champion turned around. The pentachromatic iridescent cloud was churning once more. More beams of light sprayed everywhere from it, eliciting another round of amulets whizzing in all directions. The champion took to the sky and rejoined the contest. Lu Yi sped for almost 100 miles without stopping. When he finally did, he looked back and saw the many-hued iridescent cloud now almost half of the girth of when he first saw it. The Token of Providence event had to be ending soon, and the golden amulets would be appearing any moment now. To stay in the thick of the area now would be to get stuck between a two-sided royal rumble that would surely incur huge losses. If only his cultivation rank was higher, then he would be able to join in the event too. He wouldn't have to hanker for purple or gold amulets, just the blue or even green ones would do. But as a third order, he would not be able to survive such a brutal pandemonium, especially by himself. Lu Yi was about to turn around and leave when his gaze transfixed upon the roster of carnage. The rankings on the roster were changing with blinding speed. Several names vanished, giving way to others, indicating that these cultivators have been slain or their names would not have gone missing for no reason. Some would rise, signifying a triumph, while others fell several rungs as more piled higher to overtake them. Then he saw a name at the 15th place on the roster. A name that made the corners of his eyes throb uncontrollably. Lu Yi, 370 carnage points, 1 golden amulet. The last time he checked, his name was in the 50s of the roster, and as time passed further without him adding more kills to his belt, he was expecting his name to fall out of the roster by another half-day's time. Yet here was his name, in the 15th place on the roster, and his carnage points had now risen to as much as a whopping 250 points compared to his former tally of 120. That's impossible. Since the Carnage Coliseum began, Lu Yi had killed 2 enemies, and still, instead of falling out of the roster of carnage, he remained in the 15th place. At any rate, this was not an indication that the rest of the other contestants of the Coliseum were weak. Most of the rosters were cultivators beyond the 7th order, 8th or 9th orders at least. That could only mean that the award of carnage points for killing a cultivator far beyond one's rank of cultivation must be very, very substantial indeed. His first kill was a 5th order, an enemy 2 ranks beyond his, and that earned him 120 carnage points. The kill just now was a whopping 250 points. Lu Yi quickly made some calculations. That yielded the conclusion: the unlucky bloke he slew just now was a 7th order. Cloud River Realm 7th orders were worth 50 carnage points each. With the difference of 4 ranks between Lu Yi and the stranger he killed, that would multiply the amount by 5 times, making it 250 carnage points in total. A 7th order? Wow, Lu Yi did not know what to say. Just when he thought that his name would be dropping out of the roster, it got propelled into prominence once more. There was no telling how long it would take this time for his name to plunge down again. At the very least, Lu Yi was consoled by the fact that the roster of carnage did not reveal one's rank of cultivation, or everyone in the Coliseum would see how a 3rd order's name was smacked right in the middle of a bunch of 8th and 9th orders. His name would stand out right from the first glance. This reminded him of how he had got his name listed in the Spirit Creek Battlefield's roll of supremacy at the rank of Heaven 7, taking the entire battlefield back then by storm. Chapter 504, Heaven's Feud with Me. Lu Yi withdrew his gaze and continued on his way. An hour later, he found another cave which he slipped inside of and worked on conjuring more wards. The Token of Providence event had ended and the pentachromatic iridescent clouds were gone, but that did not mean the end of the impromptu battle royale. If 8th and 9th order cultivators were usually reluctant to fight, the distribution of amulets by the event was certainly an impetus that lighted a spark to the tinderbox, making this a savage brawl where all scruples were either temporarily deferred or downright forgotten. The names on the roster of carnage never stopped shifting up and down with every triumph and defeat as the gritting slaughter continued, reminiscent of the rapid frenzy of a split-flap display. Such was the Carnage Coliseum, an environment of untold perils for weaker and younger cultivators, but a cornucopia of opportunities for those whose thirst for more action or rewards remained unsatiated. To that end, even as time passed, the number of cultivators in the Coliseum did not reduce. Instead, more cultivators were swarming into the Coliseum. They did not come to get their names on the roster of carnage. With numerous cultivators faster and deadlier than them, there really was no chance of climbing the roster of carnage. Even if they did, the placements would not be high enough to guarantee any rich rewards. The true value of being ranked on the roster of Carnage was getting into one of the first 20 spots where winners would be awarded gold amulets. Their target was also not the Token of Providence events, which would eventually culminate into nothing more than just brutal free-for-alls where low-tier cultivators would count themselves lucky to survive, let alone expect to win any amulets. For what then? What could impel these cultivators into entering the Colosseum willingly at the risk of their own safety and life? It was the countless opportunities that abound the entire Colosseum. Lu Yi had finished his latest multi-point teleportation ward after testing its link to the rest of the wards scattered everywhere else and was leaving the cave when he saw a twinkle of light winking at him. He could have sworn that the speck of light was not there when he first came, meaning that it only appeared recently. Which Lu Yi was quite certain was the case, or he would have not missed something so obvious the moment he arrived. The twinkling speck of light must have appeared only after he went inside the cave to construct the wards. Lu Yi recognized what the twinkling light was. He had read about them before from the Divine Trade Association materials. Without any hesitation, he strode to the light and groped at it. The light vanished immediately the moment he closed his fist around something solid, revealing it as an amulet of the lowest class, a white one. Nevertheless, Lu Yi knew better than to look at a gift horse in the mouth. He got the amulet for nothing after all. Not wanting to loiter, he left quickly. Specks of light heralding surprises could be a common occurrence in the Colosseum. As to what surprises these glow orbs held, no one could tell for sure. It could be spirit stones, pills, or even spirit artifacts and amulets, anything that could be a boon, big or small, to all cultivators. They could appear any moment, any time, anywhere. Such were the fortuitous opportunities that teemed the treacherous Carnage Colosseum. There was no doubt that the appearances of these encounters were the handiwork and elaborate contrivances of the invisible hand that steered all that occurs in the battlefield, the mysterious entity known as the Heavens who shared the same cold-hearted indifference of a man toying with an ant nest by luring more cultivators into the battlefield using various sorts of valuable supplies they were so dependent on. Thus, every time the Carnage Colosseum opened, it marked the launch of another festival, one of brutal slaughter and untold opportunities. Nevertheless, it was these pervasively widespread opportunities that were the motivations that had lured so many cultivators, strong, mediocre, and weak alike, into the Colosseum. The very element that worked like a charm. Most of them were not here for the roster of Carnage, and even fewer would ever hope to benefit from any Token of Providence events, hence they did all they could to stay alive. So long as they drew breath, they could encounter more prizes anywhere around the Colosseum. Lu Yi might have picked up a pathetic white amulet, but on another day he might be lucky enough to stumble upon a gold amulet or even a wisp of sanctification. There were rumors of a cultivator who had once struck gold by finding a spirit artifact so rare that it was worth a queen's ransom. In the meantime, Lu Yi went on searching for more locations to stash his teleportation wards, which were simple and straightforward enough for him, all thanks to glyph, concealment, and his incredible spiritual senses. Time breezed by swiftly. A day had passed, and Lu Yi was sitting in a subterranean cavern, right at the center of the newest teleportation ward he had constructed. He had completed 12 multi-link teleportation wards, and each of them could at least send him to 2 other wards elsewhere. This was the safety net that he would rely on if and when his identity was exposed. He could choose to stand and fight, but in the event of overwhelming odds, Lu Yi could always fall back to any one of the teleportation wards and escape elsewhere. But right now, he remained there, completely immobile. The Carnage Colosseum might be a veritable treasure trove filled to the gunwales with prizes and chances, but so were its perils. More so, since virtually every 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivator would have been informed of his presence in the Colosseum by now. For all he knew, there could be parties actively scouring every inch of the Colosseum with a fine-tooth comb for him. To that end, he thought it wise to just sit tight for the moment. Being down underground, Lu Yi could not see the roster of Carnage. The last time he saw it, his name had been pushed out of the 50th spot again. With enough time, his name would be off the roster of Carnage. Every 2 hours, Lu Yi would activate his teleportation ward to reassess its link with the rest, examining to see if any one of the wards in the whole network had failed. He had taken special care to choose only spots covert and concealed, but one could never be too careful. One could not discount the possibility of a curious cultivator venturing inside for a look, especially the one he came from earlier. With the heavens sprinkling goodies everywhere in the vicinity, somebody might be inquisitive enough for a spelunking trip inside the cave, hoping to find some hidden treasure. Fortunately, there were his self-destructive wards for this contingency. Once triggered, the wards would detonate and destroy every trace of him ever being there before. No one would discover what he had done there. Not far away, he could sense signatures of spiritual power erupting. A fight had to be going on nearby, and from the strength of the signatures, the combatants had to be at least 7th orders. Which hardly surprised Lu Yi, since fights like these happened everywhere in the Colosseum. He would just have to stay down here. If anyone were to discover him hiding here, he would just immediately teleport elsewhere. I'm safe. A satisfied Lu Yi mused, feeling somewhat secure. All he had to do was wait until the Colosseum's conclusion so that he could get out of this accursed death trap. He swallowed another spirit pill and took out another manuscript to read. Lu Yi had finished reading everything Lady Yun gave him, but he recently learned that rereading them would yield fresh discoveries, details that he had missed out before during his first read, making the activity the best way to kill time. Lu Yi was reading when an anomaly in the space before him tore his attention away. Right in front of him, hanging in midair, was a tiny black dot that had appeared out of nowhere. Lu Yi observed it intently. The black dot gradually grew in size before it began spinning in spirals. Next, a speck of gold bloomed like a blinding flower. As the golden speck of light turned brighter and bigger, Lu Yi saw what it was, a gold amulet. Suspended almost a meter above ground as if by an invisible force, it swayed lazily to the motion of an unseen undulation in the air. The gold amulet looked no different from the gold amulets he had seen before, save for a strange pale emerald glow enveloping it. Lu Yi squinted his eyes as a foreboding dread coiled its claws around him. Oh no! Lu Yi knew exactly what it was. That a gold amulet would appear before him out of the blue could never be a random coincidence. The entity known as the Heavens selected a cultivator every day and bestowed upon the chosen a gold amulet. But unlike all other gold amulets that could be stowed away, kept, or even used immediately, this particular gold amulet could never be touched until after 24 hours. But that was hardly the entirety of the caveat. Gold amulets bestowed in this manner would emit a pulsing blast of spiritual power every 6 hours, thus exposing its bearer's position no matter where he or she could be hiding. Any other cultivator nearby would instantly be alerted. Lu Yi stared at the saffron gold luminescence bobbing placidly several inches from him with a conflicted grimace. He could barely articulate how he felt right now. Is this good luck, or is this the worst one possible? Out of the hundreds and thousands of cultivators scattered across the vast Colosseum expanse, he was chosen to be awarded, or cursed, with the gold amulet. Lu Yi had made up his mind to ride out the Carnage Colosseum until its end, and for that to happen, he expected to stay hidden the whole time. Now this. How was he going to stay hidden with something that would broadcast his position every 6 hours attached to his hip? If this proverbial thorn was going to stay figuratively embedded in him, that would mean that he would be exposed to dangers at least 3 to 4 times for the next 24 hours. Just what the hell is going on? Do the heavens have a feud with me? Lu Yi was picking up a pattern here. The many-hued iridescent cloud during the Token of Providence event before was clearly intended for him even when he was painstakingly trying to keep a low profile. Yet here the heavens had just dropped a bombshell right into his lap once again. So much for having good luck? He mused sardonically. Lu Yi watched the gold amulet basking in its aureate flame-like glow. Then an idea came to him. But he needed to test it out, and to do that would incur a certain amount of risk. Deciding to grind and bear the consequences anyhow, he activated the teleportation ward he was sitting inside of. Next second, he began to feel the strange sensation native to the use of teleportation ward. A powerful pull, as if the ground beneath him had vanished into a bottomless abyss and he was being drawn into it. A split second later, Lu Yi was gone as if the ground had swallowed him whole. If only he could avoid using the teleportation ward. Using the ward, this one and the one that he wished to be conveyed to, produced spiritual power emanations, signatures that everyone else nearby could detect, and this was detrimental to his plans. But there was little time to worry about that now. By the time the strange tugging feeling was gone, he found himself sitting at the center of another one of his teleportation wards more than 200 miles away, nauseous and discombobulated by the ordeal. But there was no rest for the wicked. The first thing he did was to project his senses and make sure that he was alone. Only when he was satisfied that the coast was clear did he finally breathe his first sigh of relief in what had been several minutes of gripping anxiety. He looked up and saw something that immediately weighed on his shoulder like a hill. Even after 200 miles away, the gold amulet remained attached to him like a monkey on one's back. As much as he anticipated this, seeing with his own eyes what he dreaded transpiring came like a sledgehammer blow. But he was not surprised. Knowing full well that this was another one of the heavens' ironic contrivances, he never expected to be let off the hook easily. And since he couldn't change a thing, then he would have to meet this difficulty as best as he could. He reached for the gold amulet and clutched it in his fist. It was hard. The pale chartreuse phosphorescence looked fragile like a marshmallow at first glance, but it was as unexpectedly hard as a diamond. He tested trying to stow the amulet away, but to no avail too. It was true then. This gold amulet would remain stuck on him for 24 hours. It couldn't be put away nor used. As much as this predicament had almost sent him into a panicking frenzy, perhaps it wasn't that bad anyway. Any other Cloud River Realm Third Order would have to start rueing their imminent doom if they were beset by such a fate unless they were lucky enough to latch themselves to a champion powerful enough to protect them. Otherwise, good luck trying to stay alive with their position getting broadcasted every 6 hours. But Lu Yi had a real chance of staying alive. For what it was worth, he was grateful that he had not been idle. The entire day's worth of work in constructing all 12 teleportation wards had paid off. So even if his position was broadcasted, Lu Yi could easily teleport himself to the next ward. That could mean losing one ward whenever his position was being exposed, 3 to 4 teleportation wards, but it was a price he was willing to pay if it ended with him winning a gold amulet. An amulet of this quality would no doubt be a boon to his progress. Reflecting on the forthcoming fruits of his labor at least restored some sense of confidence in him. Chapter 505, The Ill-Fated Encounter. On that note, Lu Yi felt more at ease knowing that he still had a very good chance at staying alive despite whatever odds the heavens were stacking against him. He took the gold amulet and slipped it into his pocket and went back to reading. That made the time pass by relatively quickly. With the first 6th hour mark nearing, Lu Yi tucked away his book and extracted the gold amulet. Next, he waited and observed, staying at the center of his teleportation ward. The information he had indicated that the gold amulet would erupt once every 6 hours, broadcasting its position. But as to how, Lu Yi wasn't informed at all, and this was the first time he encountered something like this. Seconds ticked like an eternity. All of a sudden, the already shiny glow of the gold amulet blazed with a stronger and brighter radiance that mimicked a star. A radiance that could permeate through everything, anything, blasting out of the cave in a column of light that reached straight for the clouds overhead. That was not all. With the column of light, erupted a huge pulse of spiritual power. Lu Yi had been anticipating something like this, but seeing it up close was nevertheless awesome enough that he needed to squint his eyes at the blinding light. Beyond any doubt, every single cultivator within 100 miles of this place would see this spectacle. The humongous beam of light lasted for 10 seconds before it finally ebbed away like extinguishing embers, and the gold amulet resumed its usual lethargic green glow as if the phenomenon seconds ago did not happen at all and everything was just a dream. But reality would prove otherwise. Lu Yi was already hearing cascades of footfalls approaching, followed closely by chatter. Here, there's a cave. Full. Hiding in a cave and getting himself trapped inside. This must be an amateur who knows nothing about the Colosseum. Careful. Let's ascertain his affiliation first. Lu Yi could hear different voices in conversation, at least 3 to 4 people. They must be a group. Parties like this were commonly made up of lower-tier cultivators here in the Colosseum. Cultivators powerful enough to hold their own oftentimes traveled alone. While most champions preferred being alone out of temperament, some were just unwilling to share whatever bounty they discovered individually. Hey there inside. We're Grand Sky Coalition cultivators. If you're an ally, please show yourself, cried a voice from outside. But Lu Yi wasn't born yesterday and he was not going to believe that. No matter who the strangers outside were, he was ready to leave at first notice. That does it, let's get inside and just be done with it, said another voice. They must have been nearby since they were the first to arrive. But one thing was certain, everyone within 100 miles from here had seen the beam of light. If he delayed too long, this place would be swarming with enemies, or competitors to the prize. The party's collective strength might be good, but not good enough to deal with true champions. The one who suggested rushing inside had barely finished speaking when everyone detected the signature of spiritual power coming from inside. They shared nervous and oblivious glances before the leader of the party led the rest inside with their spiritual powers channeled and ready. Carefully they made their way inside, anticipating resistance. 3 seconds later, a huge rumble came roaring out from the yawning mouth of the cave, accompanied by violent spates of flames spitting out of it, and the men came hurrying out, looking utterly beaten and disheveled as they muttered words of curses under their breaths. None of them knew that booby traps were waiting for them inside. While all of them managed to escape unscathed, the ordeal was enough to reduce them to nothing more than a bunch of ashen-faced beggars with scorches and bruises all over them, plus the chaotic state of their internal energies that had severely weakened them. Gods be damned, that's a ward cultivator inside. A shadow loomed over them for one transitory beat as a figure landed before them, their battlefield imprints glowed immediately. The newcomer, a powerful 8th Order, studied their bedraggled appearances and muttered curtly, "Where is it?" The party regarded the threatening presence of the newcomer apprehensively. One of them barked warily, "Don't know. There's no one inside." The newcomer could barely believe that. He was positive that he felt traces of spiritual power coming from inside the cave just now. How could there be no one after these men had gone in? But as far as his suspicions went, little did he realize that the men weren't lying at all. Coldly, he hissed, "Surrender what you found and I'll leave you be. Otherwise, every one of you will not be walking away from here alive." There really was no one inside, the one who spoke earlier explained testily. "We came here first, but what we found inside were booby traps. Nothing and no one else. This I swear in the name of the heavens." The 8th Order frowned. If these men were willing to swear to the heavens that they found nothing inside, then that could only be the truth. He paused several seconds to think. Then, without warning, his hand shot up and he fired a blast. If the gold amulet were lost, then he would at least profit by killing and looting these men. And a furious clash ensued. It would not be long for more cultivators to congregate here at the caved-in underground cavity, and the brawl would crescendo into another full-scale battle where cultivators from both sides would band up and hurl whatever they could at the enemies with reckless abandon. In the meantime, Lu Yi was very, very far away, more than 200 miles out, inside another cave, utterly oblivious as to the powder keg that he had unwittingly set off. Not that it was his business anyway. But now that he had witnessed firsthand the spectacular extravaganza the gold amulet could cause, it was clear to him that trying to use a magical ward to contain its eruption would just be futile. That was the original plan he concocted prior to the gold amulet's eruption. But after assessing its sheer magnitude, Lu Yi began to realize that as another one of the heavens' contrivances, no human could possibly contain it. Being several meters underground inside a cave too, had failed to contain the blast of light tunneling up into the clouds. That would leave sacrificing more teleportation wards as the only viable way of surviving this tribulation. He would need to quickly move to another position as soon as the eruption of light and spiritual power by the gold amulet had ended. Fortunately, he had constructed enough teleportation wards for this contingency. Lu Yi sat there and waited for minutes to make sure that he really was alone. Satisfied at last that nothing was around, he put away the gold amulet and went back to reading. 6 hours flitted by swiftly. Just like before, the gold amulet's eruption of the beam of light came right on time, followed closely by the terrible wave of spiritual power. This time, Lu Yi did not wait to observe or listen. He immediately activated his teleportation ward and moved to the next spot. Cultivators would arrive at his previous position only to trigger the explosive wards, and they would leave the place empty-handed, with litanies of curses and expletives being repeated incessantly. Like what happened 6 hours before, cultivators later converged on this place and another furious battle was sparked. Meanwhile, more than tens of thousands of miles away from the Carnage Colosseum, a ray of light was streaking across the sky like a comet. It was a sword, and riding upon it were Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan, both of whom were racing as speedily as the sword allowed towards the opening into the Carnage Colosseum. As soon as he heard about Lu Yi being trapped inside the Colosseum, Li Baxian rushed to find out about its whereabouts. Too far and he might not get inside in time. But hearing that it was just a 2-day journey from his present location, he knew he just might be able to make it. He did not tell Lu Yi about his intention to come to find him. He knew that Lu Yi would decline the offer if he were aware of this. Just as he was worried about Lu Yi would feel the same way about his well-being too, and he wouldn't want to see Li Baxian getting himself into danger on his account. Knowing this, Li Baxian decided to just enter the Colosseum and rendezvous with Lu Yi before making plans for their next course of action. Poor Lu Yi. He might not even be at the second order yet. Why must such a cruel test be laid upon him? How is he now, I wonder? Every quarter of an hour he would check his battlefield imprint to make sure Lu Yi was still safe and sound. Wait, Lu Yi, hold on. Wait for us. We're coming. Somewhere inside the Colosseum, Lu Yi was sitting at the center of his teleportation ward, counting down the time. More than 18 hours had passed since the gold amulet showed itself to him. In less than a dozen minutes, the amulet would erupt for the 3rd time. All he needed to do was to wait this out one more time and he would be essentially safe after that. By his reckoning, the 24 hours duration would have been used up and the gold amulet should be his to use freely, and there would not be a 4th eruption if his interpretation of the heavens' rules were right. Nevertheless, he was completely prepared to believe that he could be wrong. But at the very least, Lu Yi was ready to see a 3rd teleportation ward sacrificed for the sake of his ultimate safety. He sat there quietly to bide his time. His calculations were correct. Moments later, the same eruption from the gold amulet burst out once more. First the gigantic column of light, then the huge wave of spiritual power. Lu Yi waited until the commotion was over before he once again activated the teleportation ward and he discorporated. Another 200 miles away, Lu Yi was just appearing when he realized that something was terribly amiss. He looked around and there was someone else 50 meters away, staring at him with disbelief upon his face. Evidently, the stranger was flabbergasted to see someone appearing out of thin air. Conveyance through magical means had always been a bread-and-butter part of life as a cultivator. Entering the Spirit Creek battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield all required magical conveyance using the Divine Opportunity column. But that was a magical conveyance using the power of the Divine Opportunity column. The power of the heavens themselves. Few, if any Cloud River realm cultivator was capable of ward magic, and that Lu Yi appeared right out of nowhere greatly shocked the stranger. His very presence here was just like what Lu Yi was concerned about earlier. With prizes lurking anywhere in the Carnage Colosseum, cultivators might be curious enough to explore caves and crevices hoping to find any freebies that the heavens might have kept in store for them. Therefore, when this stranger came by this cave, he stepped inside, hoping to find something most others missed. The booby traps Lu Yi set in place were in the deepest-most parts of the cave, and if no intruders ventured far enough, they would not trigger the wards. Therefore, this stranger had only come inside for a look. Finding nothing, he was just about to leave the cave when Lu Ye's figure appeared right before his eyes. What an ill-fated coincidence this was. His gaze darted down and he found a pale sapphire glow coming from the back of Lu Ye's hand. Lu Yi too saw the fiery red luminescence on the stranger's hand. Without any warning, the stranger's hand shot up and he fired a spell. The rocky terrain in the cave was exactly what he would like. It was good for Spell Cultivator to maintain as much distance as possible from their enemies. He could just focus on delivering as much damage as possible and he would be just okay. No, wait. Lu Yi cried, but it was too late. The spell missed and whizzed past him. The force of the spiritual powers caused the booby traps to activate and a terrible detonation took place with the stranger's Spell Cultivator not knowing what was going on. A frenzy of spiritual power swept through like a tempestuous storm, destroying the teleportation ward set up by Lu Yi in an instant. The powerful impact tossed him up before slamming him heavily against the rock face, causing rocks to fall from the ceiling and rain down in a deluge, threatening to bury Lu Yi underneath a mound of debris. The enemy cultivator fared no better. The self-destruction ward had triggered too suddenly, catching them both off guard with no time to prepare. In a moment of realization, they hastily activated their defensive auras to shield themselves from the blast, but that did not prevent them from being covered in dust and dirt. The dust finally settled after a few moments. Luckily for them both, the cave was sturdy enough to withstand the blast of the self-detonating ward. As the smog was gradually fading, the practitioner waved his hand, clearing his throat a few times. He lifted his gaze and that was when his attention was immediately drawn to a glimmer of aureate sparkle. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.